To learn some Parsha studies. So the name of the Parsha is Chayei Sara, the life of Sarah, and it includes the story of the passing of Sarah, as well as the burial of Sarah by Abraham. And then Abraham sends his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchok. That's the longest part of the Parsha, how he goes and looks for the kindest wife, finds her, and negotiates to take her as a wife for Yitzchok. She comes with him, and they pretty much live happily ever after. Of course, the story with the kids continues next Parsha. But at the very end of the Parsha, it talks about Avraham's second marriage, or perhaps even third marriage, because he already had Hagar earlier. That was Ishmael's mother, as well as Sarah. And here he goes ahead and marries a third time. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in today's class. Vayosef Avraham, it's chapter 25, verse 1. Vayosef Avraham, vayikach isha, ushmo keturah. Avraham, literally, Vayosef means he added. Here they just leave out that word, but that's what it means. He added, and he took another wife, whose name was Keturah. And of course, the verse goes on to list the children that he had with her, and it says how he gave them gifts and sent them to the land of the east. And basically, he stayed with Yitzchok as his main son. So who was this Keturah? Rashi says Keturah zu Hagar. Keturah was Hagar. So just another name for his second wife, who at this point is actually a full wife. When he married her the first time, she was a maidservant. And now she was a freed woman because Abraham had sent her away. If you remember in last week's Parsha, Yishmael was starting up with Yitzchok. Sarah insisted that Abraham send him away. Abraham was not so happy about it, but Hashem said to listen to her, and he did, and he sent her away. Now that's basically the same as freeing a slave. When you send a slave away, in the olden days, that's pretty much declaring them free. So Hagar was a free woman at this point. And that's why it says, Vayikach Isha, he took a wife. This was a full wife. It wasn't like last time when it was a secondary wife, because she was a maidservant. So Rashi says, V'nikras Keturah, she is called Keturah, al shenoim ma'aseha ketoras, because her actions are as beautiful as ketoras. V'shekasha pischa, and she closed her opening. She did not have relations with any other man from the time she was separated from Abraham. Now that's pretty impressive because we have to realize that she was a free woman. When Abraham sent her away,
some people might not know what Ketoris is.
Oh, Ketoris, sorry. Ketoris is incense. They used to sacrifice incense, burn incense in the holy temple every day. It was made of 11 special spices, herbs, and that's what it is.
It's in your paper that you sent us.
Sorry?
In the English version, it says what it is.
Oh, okay.
Incense.
Exactly. So we have to realize that Hagar was a free woman after Avram sent her away. She was not married, and as such, she could certainly marry somebody else, but even having relations would not have been adultery, and probably would not have been unusual considering her background from Egypt, where things were not exactly moral. Nevertheless, she did not have relations with any other man during that period of time. So that's another reason for the name Keturah, because the tes in Aramaic can be switched for a shin. So kesher, which is to tie, can be pronounced as keter or ketara. So therefore, it's another meaning of the name. We need to say that she tied herself, so to speak. She was modest during her time that she was separated from Abba. Okay. So
Can I say just one thing?
yes, please.
It's interesting to me that he sent away his sons from Keturah to the east, which is probably China, India, that kind of area.
Possible.
And what?
It's possible.
But
East is
I
all relative.
don't think that
How far
any
east
of them,
doesn't say.
I don't think that any of them look like Ishmael. So, I think there must be somebody that thinks that Keturah was not Hagar.
I'm sure there are commentaries who say that.
Yeah,
I don't know exactly who, but I'm sure there are.
yeah.
Which is actually the topic that the Rebbe brings up here. The Lubavitcher Rebbe brings up here. Because after all, Rashi tries to stick with the simple interpretation of the verse. Now, sometimes Rashi says something that seems fantastic. Like, for example, the whole story with Rivka in this week's Parsha, which seems to be such a beautiful romantic story. Rashi says she was 3 years old.
Yeah.
It kind of ruins the story because you're talking about like a toddler who's like not even in kindergarten. But I mean, first of all, she was obviously a very mature 3-year-old. Second of all, what's important to remember is that Rashi, when we say Rashi tries to interpret the simple interpretation of the text, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the most natural interpretation of the text. Rashi's not afraid of saying supernatural things. Supernatural things happened in those days.
Cream cheese. We have some in the refrigerator.
But the point is that he is trying to explain the text in the most straightforward way based on the text. So based on the fact that Yitzchok was 37 when the Akedah happened, which you can figure out from the text, based on the fact that he was told about the birth of Rivka at the time of the Akedah, like we see in the last week's Parsha, and based on the fact that you can't marry a girl before she's 3 in those days. Nowadays, wait till she's 18, please. But in those days, 3 was the minimum. So Rashi figures it out, but it's based on the text. So Rashi very much tries to stick to the straightforward interpretation of the text.
You think?
Give you a bad check.
Yeah. I'm afraid I'm going to have to mute you. Give me. How do I do that? Participants. And mute all self as needed. Okay. So what in the text clues Rashi in to think that Keturah is Hagar? What's wrong with saying that Avram married a woman by the name of Keturah? I mean, where do you see any indication that she had any other name other than Keturah? What's the point of saying she was Hagar? What is added to the story by saying that? The truth is, we do find very often our sages try to associate biblical characters whose names are not known. Our sages very often try to associate them with characters whose names are known. That's just a thing that we do find often. Like we have the story where Elijah brings a baby back to life. Our sages say that baby was Yonah, the prophet Yonah. So here we have a prophet, Yonah, we have a baby, we don't know who the baby is. Our sages kind of put the two together. Similar with the child that Elisha brought back to life. Our sages say he was the prophet known as Habakkuk. So, okay, but that's more of a medrash, non-literal interpretation. Here, Rashi is trying to give us the plain, straightforward interpretation of the text. Tells us that Keturah was Hagar. So this is a question as to what forces Rashi to say this. I don't expect any of you to have the answer. I wouldn't have guessed the answer myself if I had not studied the Rebbe's talk. But if any of you have any ideas or any comments or any life experiences they would like to share that are at least somewhat related to what we're talking about, go right ahead.
Rabbi?
Yes, please.
Yes, it's Penina
I
Sarah.
can't see you, but I can hear you.
No, okay. I have always heard that Keturah was Hagar, and I did not think it was just because of Rashi, but it could be that she was dignified with this other name, Keturah, because she wasn't the maidservant anymore. She was actually the full wife.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes sense that when she is
Rabbi?
elevated to a higher position, she gets a new name.
Rabbi?
That is something we find in the Chumash. Yosef, when he becomes the prime minister of Egypt, gets a new name. He's called Sofnas Paneach. Daniel, when he gets elevated to become the advisor of Nebuchadnezzar, he also gets a new name. I don't remember what it was, but he got a new name. That was the style in those days. When you were elevated to a higher position, you got a new name. So yeah, it does make sense. But that's if we accept that she's Hagar, then we can explain why she got a new name and it's not called Hagar. But it's not.
Excuse me, I just wanted to say one more thing, that Yaakov Avinu, after he struggled with the angel, he got the name Israel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Abram got a name. Sarah got a name. Definitely, it was a big thing in those days to get a new name. My future daughter-in-law is getting a new name tomorrow because you're not supposed to have the same
Rabbi?
name as your mother-in-law. So her father is going to add a new name to her name tomorrow by the Torah reading.
Mazel
Yes,
tov.
thank you.
Rabbi?
Thank
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
you. Ben,
Rabbi?
Rabbi,
go
can
ahead,
I
Ben,
ask you a
please, go ahead.
question?
Yes, please.
You mentioned that Joseph had got a different name when under Nebuchadnezzar.
No,
Was
no,
Nebuchadnezzar
Daniel.
at Pharaoh's time?
No, Daniel.
Oh, I'm
Daniel.
sorry. So,
Daniel got a new name by Nebuchadnezzar. Yosef got a new name from Paro, and Daniel got a new name from Nebuchadnezzar.
okay.
Was it Zerubbabel?
I want to say that it was Belshazzar. That's what I want to say, even though that's the same name as a king.
Yeah.
That's what I have in my head. I don't think it was Zerubbabel, but I will look it up right now so I can pretend I'm educated.
Rabbi,
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to say while you're researching that,
Yes.
we know that Sarah, her previous name was Sarai, if I'm not, am I correct? And
Yes.
Avram was changed to Abraham or Avraham.
Yeah.
The other name, like I say, Hagar, the reason why she may have a different name was because she came from Egypt. And maybe, maybe she brought a name from Egypt with her. There may have been another name that she had. Hagar may have been the name that Avraham Avinu called her, but maybe she had a name that she brought with her from her birth when she originated from Egypt.
I mean, it is true that she originated from Egypt, but it seems that she was called Hagar even in the house of Avram, because when Sarah presented her to Avram, she said, "Hine Hagar Amosi Ba'eleha," or something like that. Here's Hagar, my maidservant. Have a relationship with her. So she was referred to as Hagar in Avram's house. Maybe she got a second name there, but it wasn't.
But but these names were changed, from Ur, which their original names were, like I said, in the case of Avraham and Sarah, was Avram and Sarai. So those were their names in Babylon, before they came. But what I'm saying is that Hagar may have been the name that he gave her after. In other words, her name had to be changed also, so that she didn't come from a pagan a nation. In other words, it was to change the name so that
I hear
that
it.
wouldn't have been carried with them. You see,
I do hear it. Here's an interesting fact, by the way. Totally random fact. We don't find anybody in Tanakh that I know of, that I can recall, that was called by two names simultaneously. Meaning, what I mean to say is, a lot of people have multiple names. Yisro has 7 names. Moshe Rabbeinu has 10 names. Yosef, we mentioned, has 2 names. Daniel, by the way, his second name was Belshazzar, which is the same name as a later Babylonian king. So that's just interesting. But anyway, that's in the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 7. But anyway, but all of these names were used like at different times. Like Moshe was called Moshe by the daughter of Paro who found him. He was called something else by his father, something else by his mother, something else by Hashem, But we don't find him being called ever like Moshe Tzvi. You know what I'm saying? The same thing. Daniel is Daniel by the Jewish people, Belshazzar by the king. Esther had 2 names too, by the way. What was Esther's other name?
Hadassah.
Hadassah. Thank you very much. She was Hadassah to the Jews, and she was Esther to the Persians. That was her Persian name. But we don't find that she was ever called Esther Hadassah. Nowadays, a lot of people have 2 names and they're called by those names. Anyway, that's just a bit of random information.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I'm thinking the way I read it in English, although I do read Hebrew, but I don't know, is Keturah spelled the same way that Keter, like a Keter Torah would be spelled? Because I'm thinking that maybe Keturah is related to the word Keter, meaning now she has a crown.
No.
Not the same spelling.
Oh, it's
Not
not
the
the same
same
spelling.
spelling.
No, then it's not that. That's not that.
No, not the same spelling, because it has a kuf instead of a kaf.
Then it's
and
not.
it has a tes instead of a tough.
It's not. No, then it's not.
Yeah.
There may be some kind of Kabbalistic thing where the letters are changed out. According to Balatorium, some of these letters are changed, one for the other.
Who knows? Okay, so here's the Rebbe's kind of take on this, if you will. The Rebbe says that really Rashi has no basis within this verse itself to say that Keturah was Hagar. Now, by the way, before I continue the answer, I just want to go back to the question. To say that Keturah was Hagar, you don't have to have a basis in the text. Like the Medrash says it. And the Medrash is entitled to say things that were a tradition by the sages. The sages had a tradition that Keturah was Hagar. Not because there's any indication in the text. That was their tradition. And that's recorded in the Medrash, and that's fine. But Rashi does not have to quote every Medrash. There's a lot of Medrashim out there that Rashi leaves out because Rashi's trying to give you the simple understanding of the text. He's not negating the Medrashim. He's just telling you this is the simple approach. So notwithstanding that perhaps she was actually Hagar, perhaps the Medrash knew that because of a tradition, the question is, what in the text makes us think that? Okay. So now, the Rebbe explains as follows. There is nothing in the text, in this text, that makes us think that. What makes us think that is because we are in suspense to find out what happened with Hagar ever since she was sent away by Avraham in the last week's parsha.
Yeah.
We have to remember that Avraham was a master of outreach. Avraham devoted his life to reaching out to people, complete strangers, who he met in the desert, and telling them about Hashem. From a very young age, he was doing that with his parents back in Ur-Kasdim, with the king who wanted to kill him as a result of that. And even with the Tower of Babel, he was outspoken trying to convince them to change their ways. So Avram was a master educator and influencer. And therefore it's very troubling to read the story how Avram sent away Ishmael and Hagar. Now, sometimes that's necessary, and that was evidently the case. Sarah felt that Ishmael was a bad influence, and he had to be sent away. Okay. But then it says that Ishmael became a wild man. He became like a highway robber. And it says that Hagar, went back to her old ways. Rashi says in that story, Chazra ligilule beis aviha. She went back to the idols that she grew up with. And that's something very troubling. How could it be that Avraham influenced the whole world, yet the woman he was married to, first she was a maidservant in his house, and then he was actually married to her, and then he had a baby with her, and yet she just goes off the deep end. How was Avram not able to influence her? Well, you could say, well, he had to send her away because Ishmael was not behaving, and once he sent her away, she was far away from him, so he couldn't influence her. However, we do see that Yishmael came back. How do we see that? Before the story of the Akedah. The story of the Akedah, which is the binding of Isaac, starts with the words, Vayihi achar hadvorim ha'eled, was after these words. Sometimes you can translate dvorim as matters. Sometimes you translate it as words. After these words. That's when God tested Avraham and told him to bring his son as an offering. What words are we talking about? Rashi says these were words that were exchanged between Yishmael and Yitzchok. Yishmael was showing off, and he was saying, I'm better than you, Yitzchok. You got your bris at 8 days old when you couldn't protest. I got my bris at 13 when I could have protested, and I got it anyway. And that's when Yitzchak said, you know what? If Hashem would tell me that I should be sacrificed, I would go. So Hashem said, okay, if you're up to it, let's go. And that's when the test of the Akedah happened. So we see that Yishmael was hanging around with Yitzchak. He was back. And this leads us to believe that Yishmael did tshuva. The very fact that he was showing off to Yitzchak about his bris, he was proud of it. Yes. So it seems that he had finished with his highway robbery.
Oh.
And in fact, he was one of the lads that accompanied Avraham on his journey to the Akedah. Later on, when Avraham passed away, in this week's Parsha, it talks about Yitzchok and Yishmael burying him, which means that Yishmael allowed Yitzchok, the younger brother, to walk first, once again pointing to the fact that Yishmael did tshuva. So if Yishmael did tshuva, and he was hanging out with Avram's family, it's likely that Hagar was not far behind him, because we see that Hagar hung out with her son. When Ishmael was chased away, Hagar went along, or they were both chased away together. When it came time for him to find a wife, Hagar was the one who found him a wife. So they were really tight, as they say. So therefore, it's logical to say that Hagar was back. And therefore, you have to wonder, how could it be that Hagar would still be an idolatress after all these years? So we have this suspense, like we're just wondering about, like, what's going on with Hagar? And that's why Rashi says, you know what? Because we have this character, we really haven't figured out yet what happened. We're going to interpret this verse in such a way that answers that question. It's not a question of the verse itself, just a question on the general story. We have to figure out what happened with Hagar. And if we make her into this character, not make her, but if we ascribe her, if we credit her with being this character, and we understand her as being this character, then we have an answer to our question. Now,
Rabbi?
one second, let me just finish this thought. Of course, Avram wouldn't marry her if she was still an idolatress. That's why Rashi says that her actions were as beautiful as Ketoiras. Ketoiras, which is incense, had 11 spices. The 11th one actually smelled bad, and the 10 smelled good. And when you burnt them together, the bad smell was kind of mingling with the good, and it smelled good. And that represents elevating the negative into the positive. That's why it says when the Jewish people are praying, they need to have amongst them also the wicked people. Because when the wicked people pray with the righteous people, Hashem answers, because it represents the full spectrum of the Jewish people. So that's why her actions are as beautiful as Ketoiras, because it represents transformation. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I just, this is exactly on the same point, but I now I realize where the Keturah may come from. But I thought that when she was brought from Egypt, she was a princess. And this was a means by which also Pharaoh was honoring Abraham Avinu. So I don't know if that's a midrash or if that's, but the other thing that I mean, she wasn't just Tama Shivka, And the other thing was
that's correct.
That that I was not sure what misbehavior it was. I felt that rather Ismael, at the time Sarah wanted to send him away, was somehow endangering Yitzchak. That's what my understanding of it was. But do we know exactly what manner of misbehavior it was?
According to Rashi, they were fighting about the inheritance. And then Yishmael decided to use Yitzchok as target practice.
Well, that's what I thought. That's what I
And
thought.
he was doing it in a laughing manner as if it was a joke, but shooting arrows at somebody is not a joke.
No.
And Sarah realized that it was a serious matter, and that's why she got involved.
And that's what I thought.
Yes. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure.
A person could ask a question, being that Yishmael did this whole thing. He was a bad guy, and all of a sudden he's honoring Avram. Like how come Rashi doesn't address that?
Oh, Rashi says this teaches us when Yishmael lets Yitzchak go first. Rashi says this teaches us that Yishmael did tshuva. By Esav, it doesn't say that. By Esav, it says that that Yitzchak was buried by Esav and Yaakov. Esav insisted on going first. He was older. He had the right. The fact that he was wicked and Yaakov was righteous, he didn't think so. He thought he was righteous. So he never did tshuva.
I guess my question is more on the text. How come the text doesn't say what happened?
It does. That's how it says it. That's how it says it. The text doesn't have to spell things out like clearly. The style of the Chumash, Tanakh in general, is that information is given with a little remez, with a little hint, with a letter, with the placement of a word, with the masculine, feminine, plural, singular, all these little hints, the order of the words. Here, the order of Yitzchak, Yishmael, and Yitzchak. Hashem wants us to delve into the depths of the Torah. If He would spell everything out for us, then where would we toil in Torah? We're supposed to toil in Torah. So the written Torah has all these little subtle things that we're supposed to figure out. Okay. The other point is that Avraham was a person who was very careful with his purity. And especially after the Bris Milah. The letter Hey was added to his name. And it says that Hashem said to him, mankind cannot really control his two eyes and his two ears and even his sexual organ. Because sometimes you see things beyond your control, you hear things beyond your control. Sometimes a person might have a desire that seems very powerful. But he said to Abraham, I'm giving you mastery over those 5 limbs as well, by adding the Hey to his name. So Avraham was very careful with his purity. In fact, there's another medrash, which Rashi also brings down, interestingly, that Avraham was so removed from pleasures of the flesh that he literally did not know what his own wife looked like. He was married to Sarah for many years, but he never knew what she looked like until on the way down to Egypt, he noticed her reflection in the water. And he said, hey, you're beautiful. Better watch out. The Egyptians are going to want you. So he was completely like in a higher plane. And therefore, it would be difficult to imagine that he would marry Hagar if she had been with other men. Now, tshuva is nice, and we all hold of tshuva. We all want people to do tshuva. But there are some effects of certain actions that tshuva cannot repair. Take, for example, a woman who has a forbidden relationship. Even if she does tshuva, in the case of certain relationships, she can never marry a kohen. Because the spiritual damage that it does to her, or maybe it's the emotional damage, the psychological damage, whatever it might be, it impacts her in a way that cannot be repaired. And that's why she cannot marry a kohen.
Cool.
So here, and by the way, when a man divorces his wife and she goes and marries somebody else, he can never marry her again. That's one of the 613 mitzvahs. A man is allowed to marry his divorcee, but a man cannot marry his divorcee who married somebody else. So if Hagar had been with another man in between, even if it hadn't been a sin, because even if she had gotten lawfully married, and it's okay, she's a divorcee at that point. Nevertheless, it's not the level of purity that you would expect of Abraham. And that's why Rashi gives a second interpretation as well. Both are true according to Rashi. They're not two opposing interpretations. Both are true. First of all, her behavior was beautiful like Keteris, which represents the transformation of her character, like the 11th herb of that incense mix. And in addition, as far as her purity, she maintained her purity, and therefore she was still fit for Abraham.
Rabbi,
Yes.
It also tells us something about her, the fact that one of the 11 Ketot has this smell that doesn't smell so good. I think it also he's saying something that within her character there's still that aspect.
I hear you. But at the same time, the Ketoret had that aspect, and it was a mitzvah. Because if you use that aspect in a positive way, it can become a mitzvah. Okay, I want to learn with you a little piece of a Gemara, which is a sort of Gemara that you learn and you think to yourself, like, who even needs this information? Like, why is this important? The Gemara has a lot of what we call agadata, like stories. And very often the agadata is instructive, it's inspirational, it even contains deep secrets of the Torah. But sometimes it has stories which you scratch your head about, and you wonder why they were included in the Talmud. So such is a piece of Talmud on Zevachim 62b.
And Ishmael,
Go ahead.
when they want to figure out the date of the Beit HaMikdash, the 70 years, they use, I think, Ishmael's age too.
That is correct. Somebody's at the door. Give me one moment, please. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, that is true. That the death of Yishmael is used in our calculations of the years to figure out how old Yitzchok was and Yaakov was and Yosef was at various points of the story in the Chumash. And that's because we learn about Yishmael's death just at the time that Yaakov stole the brachas from Esau. That's when the Torah informs us of his death, and we know how much older Yishmael was than Yitzchok, and we know how old Yitzchok was when he had the twins. So, based on that tidbit of information, we do a lot of calculations. That's true. Okay, here's the Gemara in Zavachim 62b. B'nei achte de Rabbi Tarfon. Havu yasve kamei de Rabbi Tarfon. The sons of the sister of Rabbi Tarfon were sitting in front of Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon was, of course, a great sage of the Mishnah. He was one of the teachers of Rabbi Akiva. They later became colleagues, and they would sometimes disagree about things. But he was definitely one of the great sages of his time. So his nephews were sitting in front of him, and they were silent. They were not opening their mouths to share any words of Torah or to participate in the Torah discussion that he was having. Now, Rabbi Tarfon was not very impressed. He wanted his nephews to participate and to be, to be into it, as they say. So he tried to get them into it in an unusual way. Pasach v'Omar. He began and he said, Vayosef Avraham vayikach isha ushma Yuchni. Avram continued, and he took a wife whose name was Yuchni. Now, of course, there is no such verse. Avram never took a wife by the name of Yuchni. This is the verse from our Torah portion that we just read. But he replaced the word Keturah with the word Yuchni. Now, why did he do that? He did that because he wanted to get a rise out of them. He's purposefully put in the wrong name so they should say, hey, what's going on here? You got it wrong. He wanted to wake them up, which it says, by the way, that a teacher is allowed to do. A teacher is allowed to sometimes make mistakes or appear to make mistakes or ask questions that appear to be mistaken to his students if that's going to, wake them up to what's going on and get them involved and interested. Amrile Keturaksiv, the sons of his sister, said, hey, it doesn't say Yuchni here, it says Keturah. What's going on? You misquoted the verse. Kari Alehem B'nei Keturah. Rabbi Tarfon was not impressed with their contribution. All you can contribute is to correct the name in a verse. And he called them from then on the children of Keturah. That became their nickname, instead of whatever the real names were, or the sons of their father or mother or whatever. Instead, he would call them the sons of Keturah, because that's all they contribute. That's the story. Now, we have to understand what is the purpose of including this story in the Gemara. It's bad enough that his nephews didn't contribute. Okay, they didn't contribute. Do we have to know that they didn't contribute? What do we learn from that? Do we have to know that he gave them this nickname, B'nai Keturah? And also, just an interesting question, why specifically did he call them sons of Yuchni and no other name? What's the meaning behind that? Nothing is an accident or mistake. What is the meaning behind choosing Yuchni to try to test that? Okay, so in order to understand this,
They sent them away to the east, don't you remember?
The Rebbe quotes another Gemara that includes the name Yuch. The other Gemara is about people who are hypocritical. Sometimes people appear to be one thing and they are absolutely something else entirely. So,
Rabbi, can you mute?
yes, I can. So take, for example, Gemara says, there was a woman by the name of Yuchni who was a complete hypocrite. She was a fraud. She presented herself as if she was very righteous, very holy, and that her prayers were effective to help people. And when women were having trouble giving birth, she would go into her room alone and she would daven, and when she would come out, they would have given birth to her. People were like, whoa, this is some special woman. She davens and Hashem answers. But really, there was a whole nother story to it. And it got revealed one day. The other story to it was that she was a practitioner of voodoo magic. And she was the one who caused women to have trouble in the childbirth. She would make voodoo dolls. She would put pins into the voodoo dolls, which somehow with her magical powers, don't ask me how she had them or got them or whatever, she was able to influence that these women should have trouble having babies. And then she would go visit them, commiserate with them, poor things you. And then she would go back to her room when nobody was watching. She would take out the pins. They would have the baby. She would come out. She would say, "Oh, I daven for you." Ba 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 ba. And everybody thought she was such a big tzaddikus. And really, she was just the opposite. And the Gemara says that she was once uncovered. They once figured out she was really the cause of the problem. Anyway, but the name Yuchni, she took because it indicates something miraculous. When a person has a dream, the Gemara in Bracha says there are certain names that are a good omen during a dream. And Yochanan is a super good omen because Nun represents a miracle and Yochanan is two Nuns. So it's like a super miracle. So Yuchni is like a miraculous, a positive name. It also comes from the word Chonan, which means to be gracious. So the woman took on this name, again, to present herself as if she could open the womb and as if she was so gracious and so on. So, what are we saying here? Rabbi Tarfon wanted to accomplish something with his nephews. When a person is not successful in their studies, and you can make them successful, you can teach them, you can open them up, that's a very great merit. The Gemara says that if a person teaches Torah to a student, not even to his own son, to somebody else's son, the Torah considers it as if they gave birth to him. Because spiritually, they did give birth to him. They created a new being, spiritually speaking, by teaching them Torah. Excuse me, now, if they're already studying and you just teach them a bit more, okay, that's not really giving birth to them. Maybe it's like giving birth to them. But if they're actually not able to study, and you make a mensch out of them, that's mamish like you're their spiritual father. When I was in yeshiva in California, I remember there was one kid who was a very wild kid. I don't know his background. Maybe he's from a spoiled, maybe a rich kid, spoiled. I don't know what it was, but he just was not into his studies. And there was an older bacher, an older yeshiva bacher, who took him under his wing. They weren't related. I don't know if they had any relationship before. I don't know, because I was younger than both of them. But he took him under his wing, and they would hang out together. They would play basketball together. They would talk. And he really menched him out. He made him mensch out. Got him into learning, studies, and honestly, haven't seen either of them in 3.5 decades. So I don't know how they ended up, but if I had to guess, I would guess that the younger one also ended up as a mensch. So that's like really being a spiritual father. And when Rabbi Tarfon was trying to teach them, he was trying to open them up like the Yuchni who would open, or at least pretend to open, the womb of the women who were having children. He was trying to open them up and create new people out of these non-learned nephews of his. Now they responded, the best they could do was they corrected him, and they said, Keturah is the correct word in the verse. The Rebbe offers two explanations about what the Gemara means when it says that he called them B'nai Keturah from then on. One is a negative one and one is a positive. We always try to end on a positive note, so we'll end with the positive. First, the negative one. Keturah means to be tied up. Like we saw that the second explanation was that she tied her opening and did not have relations with any other men. So Rabbi Tarfon said, listen, I tried to open you guys up, but you're beyond help. You're completely closed. Like they say in Yiddish, a verstopfte cup. Your head is closed. I can't help you. That's a negative. Then there's a positive spin. Because the sons of Keturah, according to the Rambam, are supposed to have a bris. Even though they're not Jewish, the mitzvah of the bris applies to them because they were born after Avraham already had the obligation to have a bris. So as his descendants, they have to have a bris. This is different than Yishmael, by the way. Yishmael was born before Avraham had the obligation to have a bris. Now he himself was told to have a bris, and he did it. Impressive, blah, blah, blah. But because he was born after Avraham was told, so he was not part of the descendants upon whom there is an obligation to do a bris. So the sons of Ishmael do not have to do a bris. I think the Arabs do, but they don't have to. The sons of Keturah, on the other hand, I don't know if they're Indians or Afghanis or whatnot. I have no idea who they are. But whoever they are, according to the Rambam, they are supposed to do a bris because they were born to Avram after he already had the mitzvah of the bris. So this means that even though they're not Jewish, they have this tremendous mitzvah. That represents the transformation of negative to positive. Taking somebody who's not really a member of the covenant and saying, yeah, you can do this mitzvah too. You also have a level of holiness. So that's what Rabbi Tarfon was trying to say to them. You know what? Even though you're really far off, there's still hope for you. Even the sons of Keturah, who were not Jewish, had a redeeming factor. And you too, don't give up. Keep on working. Okay, this time all you had was one contribution, but keep on working because you'll get there. So this is the word, just to review it and sum it up. So the Parsha talks about Avram marrying Keturah. Rashi says it's Hagar. How does he know it's Hagar? Because otherwise, it's a very strange thing that Avram was able to influence so many outsiders, but not his own family. And we already know Hagar was living back in the area with her son Yishmael, who was back in the area. It's logical that she was influenced, and that's why we say this was her. She was like a Taurus, which is a transformation of bad smell to good smell. She was pure, which is how she was able to remarry Abraham. And last but not least, we learned about taking somebody who is not on the level of Torah study, proper Torah study, and imbuing them with Torah study, helping them reach it, that is like giving birth to them, and how Rabbi Tarfon worked on his nephews to try to accomplish that.
Now, Rabbi, that's similar to the way that the bad smell from the 11th ingredient in the Kataras is elevated, and it elevates the entire Kataras.
Exactly. Exactly. And even though we didn't discuss Yishmael so much, it's similar to Yishmael himself. Yishmael himself was so bad that Sarah insisted he be sent away, yet in the end, he was brought back. Abraham influenced him, but who influenced him? He was influenced, and he was able to come back and do tshuva. So that's also the same idea of taking what seems beyond hope and turning it around. Okay, I wish you all a good Shabbos, and I hope to see you next week with Hashem's help.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a good Shabbos, everybody. Good day.
All the best.